Part 1. Into the Quarantine Zone. I still remember the exact moment when the helicopter started shaking. Not the gentle turbulence you'd expect when flying through rough air, but violent jerks that signaled something was catastrophically wrong. Kyle Crane, that's my name, and this was supposed to be just another mission for the global relief effort. Just another undercover op. Get in, retrieve the file, get out. How wrong I was. Mayday! Mayday! The pilot's voice crackled through my headset, but I knew we were already past the point of no return. Through the window, I could see Harran sprawling below, a concrete maze of abandoned buildings, empty streets, and an eerie silence that seemed to radiate up even from this altitude. The setting sun cast long shadows across the quarantine zone, painting the city in shades of amber and crimson. Beautiful, in a haunting sort of way, like a graveyard waiting for its next occupant. The world tilted sickeningly as we lost altitude. I gripped the safety harness, my training kicking in automatically. Assess the situation, prepare for impact, survive. Those 3 words had been drilled into me during countless hours at the GRE Academy. But no amount of training could prepare you for the raw terror of watching the ground rush up to meet you. We hit hard. The helicopter cartwheeled across a rooftop, metal screaming against concrete. I felt myself thrown against the restraints, my vision blurring from the G-forces. Glass shattered, equipment flew everywhere, and then, mercifully, we stopped. I hung upside down in my harness, blood rushing to my head. My ears rang. Everything hurt. But I was alive. Through the cracked windscreen, I could see we'd crashed on top of a mid-rise building in what looked like the slums district. Smoke billowed from the engine. The pilot. I didn't want to look at the pilot. With shaking hands, I fumbled for the harness release. Had to move, had to get out before the fuel tanks caught fire. The buckle clicked and I fell, landing hard on the ceiling, now the floor of the inverted cabin. Pain lanced through my shoulder, but I ignored it. Survival first. Pain later. I kicked out the side door and crawled into the fading daylight. The rooftop was a mess of debris and twisted metal. In the distance, I could hear something that made my blood run cold, screaming. Not human screaming, something else. Something that sounded almost like it had once been human, but had forgotten how. The infected. I'd seen the classified briefings, watched the grainy surveillance footage that GRE had managed to smuggle out of Harran before the military quarantine went into full effect. The Harran virus, a pathogen that turned people into mindless, rabid monsters driven by one instinct, to spread the infection. The footage hadn't done justice to the sounds they made. My radio crackled to life. "This is Jade Aldemir with the tower. We saw your helicopter go down. Are you alive?" I grabbed my radio, checking it for damage. Miraculously, it still worked. "This is Kyle Crane, GRE operative. I'm alive, but the pilot didn't make it. Where are you?" "The tower. It's a survivor settlement in the Old Town district. Look, you need to get off that roof now. Sunset is in about 40 minutes. You do not want to be out in the open when the sun goes down." "Why? What happens at night?" There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice had an edge of fear that cut through the static. "The volatiles come out. They're not like the regular infected. They're fast, they're smart, and they hunt in packs. If they catch you—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I looked around the rooftop, taking stock. My gear had survived better than I'd hoped. A basic crowbar I'd packed as a last resort weapon, some medical supplies, a flashlight, and the radio. My pistol had been lost in the crash, probably buried somewhere in the wreckage. Great. Stranded in a quarantine zone full of infected, armed with nothing but a glorified stick. "How do I get to the tower?" I asked, moving toward the edge of the roof to get my bearings. "See that tower in the distance, the one with the red banner hanging from it? That's us. But you can't reach us before dark, not on foot. There's a safe house marked on your map. We've been dropping supply packages. Get there, lock yourself in, and wait until morning. The infected are slower during the day." I pulled out my map, another minor miracle that it hadn't been destroyed, and saw the location she meant. It was marked with a small house symbol, maybe half a mile away through the rooftops and streets of the slums. Half a mile that might as well have been 50 in a city full of monsters. I'm moving now, I said, stuffing the map back into my pocket. One more thing, Crane. Jade's voice stopped me. Welcome to Harran. Try not to die on your first day? The radio went silent. I approached the edge of the roof and looked down. The building was about 4 stories tall, overlooking a narrow alley filled with garbage and abandoned cars. No infected visible from this angle, but I could hear them, that terrible, inhuman moaning echoing between the buildings, and underneath that, another sound. Footsteps, running, screaming. Someone was alive down there. Before I could think better of it, I was moving. There was a ladder leading down from the roof, old and rusted, but it looked sturdy enough. I swung over the edge and started descending, my shoulder protesting with every movement. Above me, the sun continued its inexorable descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was halfway down when I heard the crash from the alley below. A young man, couldn't have been more than 20, burst around the corner, his clothes torn and bloody. Behind him came 3 infected, their movements jerky and uncoordinated but terrifyingly fast. They ran with the single-minded purpose of predators that had spotted prey. "Hey!" I shouted, not thinking about the wisdom of drawing attention to myself. "Up here!" The young man looked up, his eyes wild with terror. He saw the ladder and made a decision in a split second, changing direction and sprinting toward the building. The infected followed, their gurgling shrieks intensifying. I reached the bottom of the ladder just as he started climbing. "Move! Climb!" I yelled, then turned to face the approaching infected with nothing but my crowbar. The first one reached me, and I got my first real look at what the Harran virus did to people. Its skin was gray and mottled, covered in suppurating sores. Its eyes were milky white, unseeing but somehow still aware. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points. But it was the smell, the overwhelming stench of rot and decay, that nearly made me gag. It lunged. I swung the crowbar, catching it in the temple. The impact jarred my arms, but the creature went down hard, twitching. Not dead, could they even die? But at least temporarily incapacitated. The second one was smarter. It feinted left, then came in low, trying to tackle me. I sidestepped, bringing the crowbar down on its back. It sprawled in the dirt, but the third one was already on me, its hands clawing at my jacket. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and fetid. Then there was a crack, and the infected's head snapped back. The young man had kicked it from the ladder, buying me the second I needed to shove it away and scramble up after him. We climbed as fast as we could, our hands slipping on the rusted metal. Below us, the infected had recovered and were trying to follow, their movements clumsy but persistent. One of them actually made it up a few rungs before losing its grip and falling back to the ground with a sickening crunch. We reached the roof, and I immediately kicked the ladder away from the building. It crashed down into the alley, taking any possibility of the infected following with it. The young man collapsed on the rooftop, gasping for air. Now that I could see him properly, I noticed he was wearing the remnants of what looked like a runner's outfit, light clothing, practical shoes, and a small backpack covered in reflective strips. "Thank you," he managed between breaths. "I thought I was dead." "What's your name?" I asked, keeping one eye on the alley below where the infected were still milling about, looking up at us with blank, hungry eyes. "Amir. I'm one of the tower's runners. Was trying to reach a supply drop when I got cut off." He looked at my GRE jacket, his eyes widening. "Wait, you're the guy who just crashed, right? The pilot?" "Passenger," I corrected. "Kyle Crane. And we need to get moving. Your friend Jade told me there's a safe house nearby." Amir nodded, pulling himself to his feet. "Yeah, I know the one. But we need to hurry." "Look!" He pointed at the horizon where the sun was already touching the tops of the distant buildings. "Maybe 30 minutes until full dark. And the safe house is through 3 blocks of heavily infected territory. Then we'd better start running." What followed was perhaps the most harrowing 30 minutes of my life. Amir led the way, moving across the rooftops with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I followed as best I could, my shoulders screaming in protest every time I had to pull myself up or jump a gap. The rooftop route kept us mostly safe from the infected, but not entirely. Several times we encountered lone stragglers who'd somehow climbed up or been trapped there since the outbreak began. Each fight was desperate and brutal. These weren't soldiers or criminals I was trained to handle. These were infected people who felt no pain and wouldn't stop until they were physically incapable of moving. Amir was better equipped than me, with a machete that he wielded with grim efficiency. "You learn quick out here," he said after we'd put down a particularly aggressive group. "Or you don't learn at all." As we ran and fought and jumped, he told me more about Harran. The outbreak had started 6 months ago, emerging from the slums and spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. The government's response was swift and brutal, a complete military quarantine. No one in, no one out. Anyone caught trying to cross the wall was shot on sight, infected or not. "The tower is one of the few organized settlements left," Amir explained as we crossed a makeshift bridge between two buildings. "There used to be others." But he trailed off and I didn't press. "What about supplies? How do you survive?" GRE drops packages at marked locations. Medicine, food, weapons, whatever they can spare. That's what I was trying to collect when the infected cornered me. The drops are our lifeline. GRE. My employers. The people who'd sent me into this hellhole to recover a file that one of their scientists, a man named Kadir Suleiman, had supposedly stolen. The file that contained research on a possible cure for the Harran virus, or so they claimed. I still hadn't told anyone about my real mission. As far as Jade and the tower knew, I was just another GRE operative caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And maybe that's all I was. Maybe the file didn't exist. Maybe Suleiman was already dead. But I had my orders. Find Suleiman, recover the file. Whatever it took. There! Amir's shout brought me back to the present. He was pointing at a building ahead, a small apartment complex with steel shutters on all the windows and a reinforced door, a safe house. "We need to get down to street level. There should be a fire escape on the other side." We found the fire escape, but it was partially collapsed. The bottom section dawdled uselessly about 10 feet above the ground, swaying in the evening breeze. The street below was crowded with infected, at least a dozen of them wandering aimlessly between abandoned cars. "We'll have to jump," I said. "Are you crazy? That's a broken ankle waiting to happen." "You got a better idea? Look at the sky." He looked. The sun was barely a sliver on the horizon now, the shadows growing long and deep. And in those shadows, I could swear I saw movement, something faster, more purposeful than the shambling infected in the street. Amir saw it too. His face went pale. Volatile scouts, they come out just before full dark to hunt. If they spot us... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We climbed down the fire escape as far as it went, then dropped to the street. I landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. My shoulder flared with pain, but nothing was broken. Amir landed next to me, more gracefully. The infected noticed us immediately. Their heads snapped in our direction, drawn by the sound. Then they were running, that horrible, lurching run that was somehow both clumsy and terrifyingly fast. "Safe house!" Amir yelled, already sprinting. I ran. God, how I ran. My lungs burned, my shoulders screamed, "Au propos," and behind me I could hear the infected getting closer. One of them got near enough that I could feel its breath on my neck. I spun, swinging the crowbar blindly. It connected with something, and I heard a crunch, but there was no time to see if I'd put it down. Amir reached the safe house first, his hands fumbling with the lock. Come on," he muttered, glancing back at me with wide eyes. I was 20 feet away, 15, 10. An infected lunged from the side, tackling me into a parked car. We went down in a tangle of limbs, its hands clawing at my face. I got the crowbar between us, using it to keep those snapping teeth away from my throat. Then Amir was there, his machete flashing in the dying light. The infected's head separated from its body, and I shoved the corpse away, scrambling to my feet. "Inside!" "Now!" Amir had gotten the door open. We tumbled through the entrance, and Amir slammed the door behind us, throwing the heavy deadbolt. Immediately, Fists started pounding on the other side, accompanied by those terrible screams. But the door held. We were safe. For now. The safe house was small, just a single room with boarded windows, a few supplies scattered on a table, and a couple of sleeping bags in the corner. A UV light hummed in the ceiling, casting everything in an eerie purple glow. According to the briefings I'd read, UV light could slow or even halt the virus's progression, making it an effective deterrent. Amir collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. That was too close. Way too close. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. My hands were shaking, adrenaline crash. I'd been in combat situations before, firefights and hostage rescues and all the other dangerous jobs that GRE threw at their field operatives. But this was different. This was survival at its most primal. First time in the field? Amir asked, reading my expression. First time in Harran, I admitted. I've had training, but this... I gestured vaguely at the boarded windows where the infected were still trying to get in. Yeah, nothing prepares you for this. He pulled out a water bottle from his pack and took a long drink before offering it to me. You did good, though. Most people freeze up their first time facing the infected. You kept moving, kept fighting. That's what matters. I accepted the water gratefully. My throat was raw from breathing hard. How long have you been here? In Harran, since before the outbreak. I grew up in the slums, actually. When things went bad, I tried to get out with my family, but his expression darkened. My mother and little sister made it to a refugee camp across the wall. I got separated. By the time I found them again, the military had sealed the quarantine. They wouldn't let me through. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but I could see the pain in his eyes. At least they're safe. That's what matters. And out here, I can help others survive. The tower needs runners, people willing to risk going out into the streets to collect supplies and help survivors. It's dangerous work, but it's important. Through the windows, we could hear the night coming alive with new sounds. The shambling moans of the regular infected were still there. Andrew. But now they were joined by something else. Screeches and howls that sounded almost like some kind of twisted bird calls. And underneath it all, a chittering noise that made my skin crawl. Volatiles, Amir whispered, his voice barely audible. They're fully active now. Listen to me carefully, Crane. If you hear that sound, you run. You don't fight, you don't try to hide. You run and you don't stop until you reach UV light. Understand? I nodded, though part of me wondered what could be so terrible that it made someone as clearly capable as Amir this afraid. I would find out soon enough. We settled in for the night, taking turns, keeping watch even though the safe house was secure. Amir explained more about life in Harran, about the tower and its leader, a man named Harris Brecken, who'd organized the survivors and maintained some semblance of order, about the supply drops and the runner network that kept everyone alive, about the other factions in the city, particularly a group called Rice's Men who controlled much of the old town and weren't above murder and extortion to maintain their power. Rice is the real danger in Harran, Amir said. Not the infected. They're predictable. They see you. They attack. Simple. But Rice and his men? They'll smile while they stab you in the back. They hoard supplies, extort the weak, and anyone who stands up to them tends to disappear. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Who's going to? The military won't come in, and we're just trying to survive day to day. Rice has the numbers, the weapons, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to stay on top. Amir's expression was grim. The tower tries to help anyone who escapes from his territory, but it's not easy. I thought about my mission. Kadir Suleiman, the scientist I was sent to find, had last been seen in the old town, Rice's territory. Of course, nothing was ever easy. The night dragged on. Despite the secure walls and the UV light, neither of us could fully relax. The sounds outside were too visceral, too immediate. Several times, something heavy slammed against the door, hard enough to make the frame rattle. Each time Amir would tense, his hand going to his machete. Just volatiles check in the perimeter, he would say. The door will hold. I hoped he was right. Around what must have been 3 in the morning. I took the watch, while Amir tried to get some sleep. I sat by the boarded window, peering through the cracks at the street beyond. The moonlight revealed shapes moving in the darkness, fast, purposeful shapes that moved nothing like the shambling infected I'd encountered during the day. One of them passed directly under a streetlight that still somehow had power. For just a moment I saw it clearly. The volatile was humanoid but wrong in every way. Its skin was pale and almost translucent, stretched tight over elongated limbs and a hunched back. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the darkness. And when it opened its mouth to make that chittering sound, I saw rows of razor-sharp teeth. It moved like a predator, head swiveling as it scanned for prey. Fast, so impossibly fast. I watched it leap from the ground to a second-story window in a single bound, clinging to the wall like some kind of mutant spider before disappearing inside the building. I understood why Amir had been so afraid. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight finally pierced the boards on the windows, both Amir and I were awake and ready to move. The sounds of the volatiles had faded about an hour ago, replaced by the familiar moaning of the regular infected as they resumed their aimless wandering. "The streets will be safer now," Amir said, checking his gear. "Volatiles can't handle UV light. Direct sunlight will actually kill them. They retreat to dark places during the day, but we still need to be careful. The regular infected are still out there. I and Rice's men patrol in the mornings." We gathered what supplies we could from the safe house, some energy bars, a bottle of water, and a first aid kit that I immediately used to patch up my shoulder. The crash had left a nasty gash that I'd been ignoring, but now that the adrenaline had worn off, it was beginning to throb. Amir watched me work. "You know basic field medicine?" "Part of my training," I said, wrapping gauze around the wound. "GRE doesn't send people into hostile territories without teaching them how to keep themselves alive." "Good, you're going to need it." We left the safe house cautiously, weapons ready. The street was still full of infected, but they were sluggish in the morning light, almost docile. We could actually walk past them if we were quiet, though Amir advised against it. "They're more active than they used to be," he explained as we climbed to the rooftops to avoid a particularly dense group. 6 months ago, you could practically ignore them during the day. Now, they're getting faster, more aggressive. The virus is evolving. That was concerning. My briefings had mentioned the possibility of mutation, but to hear it confirmed was another matter. If the virus was evolving, becoming more dangerous, the tower came into view as we crossed onto the rooftops of Old Town. It was a converted apartment building, maybe 15 stories tall, with red banners hanging from multiple windows. I could see people moving on some of the balconies, survivors going about whatever passed for daily life in a quarantine zone. "Home sweet home," Amir said with a tired smile. "Or as close as we're going to get." We made our way across the rooftops, and I started to appreciate the genius of the runner system. The buildings in this part of Harran were close enough together that you could traverse large sections of the city without ever touching the ground. Someone had even set up makeshift bridges in places, planks, sheets of metal, even rope lines that you could zip line across. "We spent the first month after the outbreak just setting up routes," Amir explained. "Marked the safe paths, identified the danger zones, established safe houses. It's how we survive. Vertical mobility. The infected can't climb very well, especially the regular ones." We were almost to the tower when we heard the screaming. It came from a building to our right, a multi-story marketplace that had been converted into living quarters. The screams were followed by gunfire, sharp cracks that echoed across the rooftops. "That's the East Settlement," Amir said, his face going pale. "There must be infected inside. We need to help them." "No, the tower is right there. We can get help." But I was already moving, running toward the marketplace. I could hear more screaming now and more gunfire. People were dying. Amir cursed and followed me. The marketplace was chaos. Someone had left a door open, or maybe the infected had broken through, and now there were at least 20 of them inside, tearing through the makeshift living spaces. Survivors were fighting back with whatever they had, pipes, knives, a few guns, but they were being overwhelmed. I didn't think, I just acted. I dropped from the roof into the marketplace, landing in a roll that sent pain shooting through my shoulder. An infected turned toward me, and I swung the crowbar, catching it under the chin. It went down, and I was already moving to the next one. Amir landed beside me, his machete cutting through the air. "You're crazy, you know that?" "Been told that before." We fought our way through the marketplace, clearing infected from around the survivors and giving them time to retreat to the upper floors. It was brutal work. These weren't the slow, shambling zombies from movies. These things were fast and vicious, and they didn't stop until you destroyed their brain or severed their spine. I lost track of how many we put down. 5? 10? More? My arms ached from swinging the crowbar, and my clothes were splattered with blood, some mine, mostly theirs. But we were winning. The survivors rallied around us, fighting back with renewed courage. Then I heard the sound that Amir had warned me about, that chittering screech. "No," Amir breathed. "No, no, no. There's a volatile in here." A dark section of the marketplace where the sunlight couldn't reach. That's where it emerged from, moving with that terrible fluid grace I'd seen through the safe-house window. In the dim light, its skin seemed to glow faintly, and its yellow eyes fixed on us with predatory intelligence. This wasn't a mindless infected. This was a hunter. "Run!" Amir screamed. We ran. The volatile screeched and gave chase, moving so fast it was almost a blur. It leaped over market stalls. We scrambled across walls, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Behind us, I could hear screaming as it caught up to one of the slower survivors. "Sunlight!" I yelled. "Get to the sunlight!" There was an opening ahead, a loading dock where sunlight streamed in. We sprinted for it, the volatile right on our heels. I could hear its breathing, feel the displacement of air as it swiped at me with clawed hands. 5 feet from the sunlight. 3, 1. We burst into the sun, and the volatile shrieked, pulling back. It circled the edge of the shadows like a shark, those yellow eyes fixed on us with what looked like hatred. Then slowly, it retreated back into the darkness. But not before making that chittering sound one more time, a promise that it would remember us. We collapsed in the sunlight, gasping for breath. Around us, the survivors who'd made it out were checking on each other, tending to wounds. Too many didn't make it. "That was insane," Amir said. "Brave, but insane. Volatiles almost never stay in their nest during the day unless they're trapped. It must have been in the basement when the infected broke in." "Are they all okay?" I asked, looking at the survivors. "They're alive. That's what matters." Amir pulled himself to his feet, offering me a hand. "Come on. Let's get to the tower before anything else tries to kill us." The tower's entrance was heavily fortified. Barricades, guards with rifles, and a massive steel door that looked like it could withstand a tank. The guards recognized Amir immediately and let us through, though they eyed me with suspicion. "New runner?" one of them asked. "Survivor from the helicopter crash," Amir explained. "This is Kyle Crane. He's GRE." The mood shifted immediately. The guard's suspicion turned to hostility, and I could hear muttering from the other survivors in the entrance hall. "GRE," one woman spat. "You people left us here to die." "That's not," I started, but Amir put a hand on my arm. "Let it go. They're angry and scared. Can you blame them?" He led me through the tower, and I started to understand the scope of the survivors' settlement. The building had been completely repurposed, each floor dedicated to different functions: medical bay, workshops, living quarters, storage. There were maybe 100 people here, all working together to survive. We reached the top floor where Brecken had his office, a corner room with windows that looked out over the quarantine zone. The man himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and the kind of weathered face that comes from too much stress. "Amir," he said, relief evident in his voice, "we thought you were dead when you didn't come back last night. And this must be our GRE operative who decided to make a dramatic entrance." "Kyle Crane," I introduced myself. "I appreciate the rescue." "Don't thank me. Thank Jade and Amir." Brecken gestured to a young woman who'd been standing by the window. She was maybe mid-20s, athletic build, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Jade Aldemir," I assumed. "You're lucky we spotted your crash," she said. Her voice was the same one I'd heard on the radio, but in person there was an intensity to her that the static had hidden. "Another few minutes, and you'd have been volatile food. I owe you both." I looked at Brecken. "I was told GRE sends supply drops. Is there any way to contact them?" Brecken's expression hardened. "That depends. Are you here to help us or just recover whatever you came for?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you think I came here for something specific?" "Because GRE doesn't send operatives into quarantine zones for humanitarian reasons," Jade said flat. "They send them when they want something. So what do they want? What's worth risking someone's life in this hell?" I thought about lying, maintaining my cover, playing the role of the confused operative who just wanted to help. But something in their eyes, the exhaustion, the distrust, the desperation made me reconsider. They deserved better than lies. "I was sent to find a scientist named Kadir Suleiman," I admitted. "He worked for GRE on the virus research project. 3 weeks ago he went dark, stopped reporting, stopped sending data. GRE thinks he stole research files about a possible cure." The room went silent. "A cure?" Brecken finally said. "There's a cure?" "Maybe. GRE doesn't know for certain. That's why they need the files, to confirm what Suleiman found and continue the research." "And if you can't find this scientist or his files?" Jade asked. I met her gaze. "Then we're all stuck here, forever." Brecken turned to look out the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Suleiman, I know that name. But he was working with another scientist before the outbreak, a man named Camden. They had a lab in Old Town, near the museum. But when things went bad," he trailed off. "What happened?" "Camden died. Infected got him during the initial outbreak. Suleiman survived, but he went underground. Rice's men have been looking for him too." "Why would Rice want a GRE scientist?" "Because Rice wants anything that might give him more power," Jade said bitterly. "If he knows about the cure research, he'll want it for himself, to use as leverage, maybe to bargain for a way out of the quarantine zone." This was getting more complicated by the minute. Not only did I have to find Suleiman in a city full of infected, but I also had to compete with a warlord who had no qualms about violence. "I need to get to Old Town," I said. "You search the lab, find leads on where Suleiman might be." "That's suicide," Amir protested. "Old Town is Rice's territory. His men shoot first and don't bother with questions." "I don't have a choice. This is what I was sent here to do." Brecken turned back from the window. "If you want to survive in Harran, you're going to need help. Jade can show you the runner routes into Old Town, teach you how to move through the city. Amir can give you combat training. You're decent, but decent gets you killed out here. And in exchange, help us. You're GRE, which means you have access to things we don't. Communication equipment, medical supplies, information about the virus. Work with us and we'll help you find your scientist." It was a fair deal. More than fair, actually. I extended my hand. "Deal." Brecken shook it. "Welcome to the tower, Kyle Crane. Try not to get yourself killed before you're useful." Part 2. The hunter becomes the hunted. The next few days were a crash course in survival. Jade took charge of my training with an intensity that left no room for mistakes. We'd start before dawn, climbing to the highest rooftops where the air was thin and the view stretched across all of Harran. "Out here, hesitation kills," she said as we balanced on a narrow beam 40 feet above the street. Below us, infected shambled through the early morning mist. "Your body knows what to do. Trust your instincts." She made it look effortless, leaping between buildings, swinging from pipes, using momentum to carry her across gaps that looked impossible. I followed, my muscles screaming, my injured shoulder a constant reminder of the crash. Better," she'd say when I made a clean landing, or sometimes just again when I didn't. Between training sessions, I helped with the tower's operations, supply runs, reinforcing barricades, teaching other survivors basic self-defense. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. And slowly, the survivors who'd been hostile when I arrived started to warm up to me. "You're not like other GRE operatives," one of them told me after I'd helped repair a water filtration system. "Most of them act like we're lab rats. You actually give a damn. Did I? I'd come here for a mission, following orders like I always had. But somewhere between the helicopter crash and now, something had shifted. These weren't just mission parameters anymore. They were people, friends even. On the fourth day, Jade decided I was ready for Old Town. We left at first light, taking the rooftop routes through the slums. The city was waking up, smoke rising from cooking fires, survivors emerging from safe houses to scavenge for supplies. From up here, you could almost forget about the infected below, almost pretend this was a normal city. Almost. The lab is in the museum district, Jade said as we paused on a water tower to survey the route ahead. Race's men patrol heavily there, but there's a back way through the abandoned metro tunnels. It'll be dark, possibly infected, but safer than the streets. You've been there before? Once, before Rice locked down that sector. We were trying to evacuate civilians, but she trailed off, her expression hardening. We lost good people that day. Rice doesn't negotiate, doesn't show mercy. Remember that. The metro entrance was hidden in a collapsed parking garage, marked with the runner's symbols that indicated it was relatively safe. Relatively being the key word. In Harran, nothing was truly safe. We descended into the darkness, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The metro tunnels were a maze of abandoned trains and collapsed sections, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. Our footsteps echoed in the silence, too loud for comfort. "Stay close," Jade whispered. Metros are popular nesting spots for infected. The darkness, the confined spaces, they feel safe here. We moved carefully through the tunnels, avoiding the areas where our lights revealed telltale signs of infected presence, scratches on the walls, dried blood, scattered belongings from people who hadn't made it. And we were halfway through when we heard it, that familiar moaning, but distorted by the tunnel acoustics into something nightmarish, and it was getting closer. "Multiple contacts," Jade said, drawing her machete. "Stay together. Watch the rear." They came from both directions, maybe a dozen infected, attracted by our lights and sounds. In the confined space of the tunnel, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We had to fight. The first wave hit us hard. I swung my crowbar in short, controlled arcs, trying to conserve energy while putting down as many as possible. Beside me, Jade moved with lethal precision, her blade finding vital spots with every strike. But they kept coming. My arms burned, my shoulder throbbed where the old injury hadn't fully healed. An infected got past my guard and slammed me into the tunnel wall, its hands clawing at my face. I could feel its fingernails scraping against my skin, drawing blood. I headbutted it, not elegant but effective. It staggered back and I finished it with a crowbar to the skull. But there were too many. We were being overwhelmed. "The train!" Jade shouted, pointing to an abandoned subway car 20 feet away. "Get inside! We can bottleneck them!" We ran for it, the infected right behind us. Jade reached the train first and yanked open the emergency door. I dove through just as an infected grabbed my ankle. I kicked frantically, connecting with its face, and Jade slammed the door shut. The infected threw themselves against the windows and doors, their screams echoing through the tunnel. But the train held, for now. "That was close," I panted, checking my injuries. Scratches and bruises. Nothing serious. I'd been lucky. "Too close," Jade agreed. She was examining the train car, looking for another way out. "The tunnels ahead should be clearer. If we can get through this car and out the other side, we can avoid most of them." We made our way through the train, moving from car to car. Some were empty. Others contained grim reminders of the outbreak, bodies both infected and human, locked in their final moments. I tried not to look too closely. The last car opened onto a maintenance platform that led to a service ladder. We climbed up and emerged in a maintenance station that connected to the museum district. "We're close now," Jade said, checking her map. "The lab should be 2 blocks east." We exited the station cautiously. The museum district was different from the slums. The buildings were older, more ornate, relics of when Harran had been a prosperous cultural center. But the outbreak had been merciless here too. Museums and galleries stood empty, their treasures abandoned or destroyed. The lab was in a converted townhouse, its windows boarded up and door barricaded from the outside. Someone had been here recently. The barricade looked fresh, and there were signs of forced entry. "Rice's men," Jade whispered, pointing to boot prints in the dust. "Recent, maybe within the last day or two. We need to be careful." We entered through a second-story window, dropping into what had once been a bedroom, but was now filled with scientific equipment. Papers were scattered everywhere, filing cabinets overturned, clear signs of a hasty search. "They were looking for something specific," I said, examining the mess. But I don't think they found it. I started searching systematically, looking for anything that might lead me to Suleiman. Most of the research notes were too technical for me to understand. Viral load calculations, genetic sequences, treatment protocols. But then I found something interesting, a journal, handwritten, detailing the early days of the outbreak. The entries started clinical, scientific observations about the virus's spread and effects. But as the pages progressed, the tone changed. The writer, presumably Camden or Suleiman, had started to realize what they were dealing with. The virus wasn't natural, it had been engineered, and they'd been part of the team that created it. "Jade, you need to see this," I said, but she was staring out the window, her expression tense. "Crane, we have company." I looked. Below, Drukrum, in the street, a convoy of vehicles had pulled up, military-style trucks and armed men in tactical gear. Rice's forces, and there were at least 30 of them. "How did they know we were here?" I asked. "They didn't. Look." She pointed to the lead vehicle, where armed men were unloading what looked like equipment cases. "They're setting up some kind of operation. This was planned." We watched as they entered a building across the street, a grand museum with marble columns and elaborate architecture. They moved with military precision, securing the perimeter and establishing a command post. "What are they doing?" Jade wondered aloud. I had a sinking feeling I knew. "They're looking for Suleiman, same as us, and I think they're a lot closer to finding him than we are." We needed to move. If Rice's men found Suleiman first, the cure research would be lost. But we couldn't fight our way through 30 armed soldiers. We needed to be smart. "There," Jade pointed to the museum's roof where I could see skylights. "If we can get up there, we might be able to see what they're up to, maybe even overhear their communications." We exited the lab carefully, making our way across rooftops to position ourselves above the museum. The skylights were dirty but not completely opaque. We could see down into the main gallery below. What we saw made my blood run cold. The gallery had been converted into some kind of research facility. Medical equipment, containment units, and in the center, a table with restraints. And standing next to it was a man I recognized from my briefings, Kadir Suleiman. But he wasn't a prisoner. He was working with them. "I don't understand," Jade whispered. "Why would he help Rice?" I was wondering the same thing. Then I saw what they were working on. Infected subjects, restrained and sedated, undergoing some kind of procedure. Suleiman was injecting them with something, taking samples, making notes. They're experimenting on them, I realized, using the infected as test subjects. One of Rice's men approached Suleiman, and we could just barely make out their conversation through the skylight. "The minister is pleased with your progress," the man said, "but he wants results faster. The military won't hold the quarantine line forever." "Science cannot be rushed," Suleiman replied, his voice weary. "The cure is complex. One wrong variable, and the treatment could kill the subject instead of healing them. Then test it. That's what these things are for." The man gestured dismissively at the restrained infected. "They're not things, they're people. Infected, yes, but still people. Not anymore. Now they're your lab rats. Get back to work." The man walked away, and for just a moment I saw Suleiman's expression. He looked haunted, trapped. He wasn't working with Rice willingly. He was being coerced. "We need to get him out of there," I said. "How?" "There are 30 armed men down there, and we have a crowbar and a machete." "Then we'll need to be creative." I studied the layout of the museum, looking for weaknesses. The building was old, with multiple entry points and complex architecture. If we could create enough chaos, maybe we could extract Suleiman in the confusion. "What are you thinking?" Jade asked. "I'm thinking we're about to make things very complicated for Rice." Part 3. The Extraction. We spent the next hour planning. The museum had 4 main entrances, multiple skylights, and a basement that connected to the old sewer system. Jade knew the area well. She'd run supply routes through here before Rice took control. "The basement entrance is here." She pointed to our crude map, sketched on a piece of paper. "Rice's men might have guards posted, but probably not many. They don't expect anyone to come through the sewers. So we go in through the sewers, make our way to the gallery, grab Suleiman, and get out the same way. That's the simple version. The complicated version involves probably having to fight our way through guards, avoiding infected in the sewers, and hoping Suleiman is willing to come with us. He'll come. Did you see his face? He doesn't want to be there. Maybe. But people do strange things when they're scared, or when they think they're doing the right thing." She had a point. But we didn't have many options. We needed that cure research, and Suleiman was the only one who could complete it. We made our way, back through the tunnels, to a sewer access point that connected to the museum's basement. The smell was overwhelming, raw sewage mixed with the stench of decay. I pulled my shirt over my nose, but it didn't help much. The sewers were dark and maze-like, with water flowing ankle-deep through the main channels. Our flashlights revealed disturbing sights, bodies floating in the water, both human and infected, in various stages of decomposition. "Don't touch the water if you can help it," Jade warned. "God knows what diseases are brewing down here." We followed the main channel until we found the access tunnel that led to the museum. It was marked with old maintenance symbols, barely visible under layers of grime and mold. The tunnel sloped upward, and we could hear sounds above us, machinery humming, people talking, the occasional bang of metal on metal. Rice's operation was directly overhead. We found the access hatch, rusted but still operational. I climbed up first, slowly pushing the hatch open a crack to peek through. The basement was being used for storage, crates of medical supplies, weapons, and what looked like research equipment. 2 guards stood near the stairs leading up to the main level, smoking and talking. They looked bored, unprepared for trouble. I signaled to Jade, and we eased through the hatch as quietly as possible. We needed to take out the guards without alerting anyone upstairs. No gunfire, no screaming. Jade moved first, her footsteps silent on the concrete. She was a shadow, barely visible even in the dim light of the basement. The first guard didn't see her until her arm was around his throat, cutting off his air. He struggled briefly, then went limp. I took the second guard, using a sleeper hold I'd learned in training. He was heavier than the first, stronger, but surprise was on my side. After a few seconds of struggle, he too went unconscious. We dragged them behind some crates and tied them up with zip ties from their own tactical vests. They'd wake up eventually, but by then we'd hopefully be long gone. The stairs led up to a corridor that connected to the main gallery. We could hear Suleiman's voice lecturing about viral mutations and treatment protocols. He sounded tired, defeated. We crept along the corridor, staying low, until we could see into the gallery. The scene was much as we'd observed from above. Suleiman working at a lab station, surrounded by equipment and infected test subjects. But now I could see more details. The subjects were heavily sedated, barely moving, while Suleiman ran tests and recorded results. There were fewer guards than before, maybe 8 or 9 visible, with most of Rice's force apparently deployed elsewhere. This was our window. But how to get Suleiman's attention without alerting the guards? Jade had an idea. She pulled out a small mirror from her pack and used it to reflect light from a distant lamp toward Suleiman's position. The beam caught his eye, and he looked up, confused. Jade flashed the light again, directing his gaze toward our hiding spot. His eyes widened when he saw us, and for a moment I thought he might cry out. But he composed himself quickly, returning to his work while subtly nodding to indicate he'd seen us. Now came the hard part. We needed to create a distraction big enough to pull the guards away from Suleiman, but not so big that it brought reinforcements. I spotted our opportunity. A fire alarm on the wall, old-fashioned but probably still functional. If we could trigger it, the guards would have to investigate, maybe evacuate the building. In the confusion, we could grab Suleiman and escape. I signaled my plan to Jade. She nodded, already moving into position to cover Suleiman while I made my way to the alarm. I was 3 feet from the alarm when everything went wrong. One of the infected subjects, less sedated than the others, suddenly lurched upright, breaking its restraints with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. It let out a scream that echoed through the gallery, a sound of rage and hunger that brought every guard running. The creature was different from normal infected. Faster, stronger, more focused. It was one of Suleiman's experimental subjects, and whatever he'd injected it with had made it worse, not better. The gallery erupted into chaos. Guards were shouting, trying to subdue the infected. Other test subjects began to stir, their sedation wearing off. Suleiman was backing away, a horror on his face. "Now!" Jade shouted. We burst from our hiding spot. I pulled the fire alarm for good measure. It wailed to life, adding to the confusion. Jade fought her way through panicked guards toward Suleiman, while I tried to clear a path to the exit. The experimental infected was wreaking havoc, attacking guards and equipment alike. It moved with terrifying speed, its enhanced strength allowing it to tear through body armor like tissue paper. I saw it kill 2 guards in seconds, its claws ripping through flesh and bone. "Suleiman, come with us." Jade had reached him. He hesitated. "My research is in your head. We need to go now." Another infected broke free, then another. The guards were being overwhelmed. Someone started shooting, the bullets ricocheting off marble and equipment. A stray round shattered a containment unit, releasing some kind of gas that billowed through the gallery. We ran. Suleiman followed, clutching a bag that presumably held some of his research materials. Behind us, the gallery was descending into a nightmarish battle between Race's men and the infected they'd been experimenting on. We made it to the basement stairs, but the way down was blocked, more guards drawn by the alarm. We'd have to fight. Jade didn't hesitate. She charged the first guard, her machete a blur. I followed, my crowbar connecting with a guard's rifle, knocking it away, then his jaw. He went down hard. 3 guards left. They had guns, we had melee weapons. Bad odds. Then Suleiman did something unexpected. He threw his bag at one guard. But the contents, medical vials and equipment, exploding across the guard's face. The man cried out, stumbling back, temporarily blinded. We pressed our advantage, taking down 2 more guards. The last one got a shot off. The bullet grazed my arm, a line of fire that I barely felt through the adrenaline. Jade disarmed him with a kick, then knocked him unconscious with the hilt of her machete. The basement was clear, but I could hear reinforcements coming. We fled into the sewer access tunnel, pulling the hatch closed behind us and jamming it with a metal pipe. "That won't hold them long," Suleiman said, his voice shaking. "It doesn't need to, just long enough for us to get away." We ran through the sewers, splashing through the contaminated water, our flashlights bouncing wildly. Behind us, and we could hear the hatch being forced open, guards entering the tunnels in pursuit. "This way." Jade led us through a side tunnel, then another, taking a route so convoluted I quickly lost my sense of direction. But she knew these sewers, knew every turn and junction. We emerged 20 minutes later through a different access point, blocks away from the museum. The sounds of pursuit had faded, we'd lost them in the labyrinth below. We were back in the streets of Old Town, exhausted, injured, but alive. And we had Suleiman. Part 4. Truth and Consequences. We made it back to the tower as night was falling, pushing ourselves to maintain speed despite our exhaustion. The UV lights of the settlement had never looked more welcoming. Brecken met us at the entrance, his expression grave. "We heard about what happened at the museum. Rice is furious. He's put out a kill order on all 3 of you. Every scavenger and mercenary in Harran is looking for you." "Good thing we're not planning to make it easy for them," I said. We got Suleiman settled in the medical bay, where doctors checked him over. Physically, he was fine. A bit malnourished and exhausted, but nothing serious. Mentally, however, was another matter. "I'm sorry," he said when we questioned him later. I didn't want to help Rice, but he had leverage. What kind of leverage? Jade asked. Other scientists, my colleagues from the original research team. Rice's men rounded them up when the outbreak started, kept them prisoner. He said if I didn't help him, he'd kill them one by one. Suleiman's voice broke. He made me watch as he executed Dr. Werner. I shot him in front of me just to prove he was serious. Where are the others? I asked gently. The surviving scientists? I don't know. Rice keeps them separated, moves them frequently. He's paranoid about rescue attempts. Brecken exchanged glances with me. We need those people. If they were part of the original research team, they might be able to help complete the cure. First things first, I said. Dr. Suleiman, what exactly were you developing at the museum? What was Rice after? Suleiman pulled out his bag, removing a battered notebook. The cure, or more accurately, the treatment. I found a way to halt the virus's progression using a combination of antiviral compounds and engineered antibodies. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? The treatment only works on recently infected individuals, people who've turned within the last few days. For anyone who's been infected longer, the neurological damage is too severe. The treatment can stop it from getting worse, but it can't reverse what's already happened. What about volatiles? Jade asked. They're clearly more advanced mutations. Volatiles are a different issue entirely. The treatment doesn't work on them at all. They're too far evolved, too adapted to the virus. At this point, they're essentially a new subspecies. The implications were sobering. Even if we perfected the cure, we couldn't save everyone. The volatiles, the infected who'd turned months ago, they were lost. But there's something else, Suleiman continued. Something I discovered that Rice wanted kept secret. The virus, the Harran virus, wasn't an accident. It was deliberately created as a bioweapon. We know, I said. I found journals at the lab. You and Camden were part of the team that engineered it. He nodded, shame evident on his face. We thought we were doing good work. The project was supposed to enhance human cognitive function, improve disease resistance. But the sponsors, military contractors, pharmaceutical companies, they had other plans. They wanted a weapon. What went wrong? Brecken asked. Nothing went wrong. It worked exactly as designed. The outbreak here in Harran was intentional, a field test to see how the virus would perform in a real-world scenario. We were guinea pigs, all of us. The entire city was sacrificed to gather data. The room fell silent. Even though I'd suspected this from the documents I'd found, hearing it confirmed was devastating. Who ordered it? I demanded. Who's responsible? I don't know all the names. The project had multiple sponsors buried under layers of shell companies and classified programs, but I know one name, someone high up in the organization. They called him the minister. He's the one who coordinated the outbreak, who ordered the quarantine, who's been overseeing the data collection. The same minister that Rice's men mentioned, I said, remembering the conversation we'd overheard. Rice is working for him. Not just Rice. The minister has people throughout Harran. Military contacts, GRE operatives, local collaborators. He's been orchestrating everything from the beginning. My blood ran cold. GRE operatives? You mean your employers are compromised, Mr. Crane. Some of them, at least. That's why I went into hiding. I realized I couldn't trust anyone in the official channels. If I'd tried to expose the conspiracy through GRE, I'd have been killed. Everything I'd believed about my mission, my organization, my purpose, it was all built on lies. I'd been sent to recover the cure research not to save people, but to ensure the conspiracy remained hidden. We need to go public, Jade said. If the minister and his people are orchestrating this, we need to expose them. Tell the world what really happened here. They'll never let that information get out, Suleiman said. They'll kill us all first. The military quarantine isn't just to contain the virus, it's to contain the truth. Then we'll have to find a way to break through the quarantine, Brecken said. Get the information to journalists, to the internet, to anyone who'll listen and can't be silenced. It was a bold plan, probably a suicidal plan, but what choice did we have? We spent the next few days preparing. Suleiman compiled all his research, the cure protocols, the conspiracy evidence, everything. Brecken's technical people worked on finding a way to boost our radio signal strong enough to punch through the military's jamming. And I made contact with the outside world through back channels I'd established during my time with GRE. The response I got was chilling. "Agent Crane, this is Director Morrison. We know about your situation. We know you have Dr. Suleiman and his research. You need to stand down and wait for extraction." "What kind of extraction?" I asked, not trusting the answer. "We're sending a team to secure the research and eliminate any security risks." "Eliminate security risks? You mean Suleiman? You mean the witnesses?" "We mean anyone who knows too much about the project. That includes you, Crane. You were supposed to retrieve the files and return. You weren't supposed to go native, weren't supposed to learn the truth. So you're admitting it? The conspiracy, the engineered outbreak, all of it?" "I'm admitting nothing on an open channel." "But you're a smart man. You can read between the lines. Stand down. Let us handle this quietly, and you might survive." "No. Then you're a dead man. All of you. The tower will be eliminated. The evidence destroyed and the quarantine will be maintained. We'll blame it on a volatile attack. No one will question it." The transmission ended. I shared the conversation with the tower's leadership. The reaction was expected. Anger, fear, determination to fight. "How long do we have?" Brecken asked. "Hours, maybe. Morrison said they're sending a team, which means they're probably already mobilizing. If they're coming from outside the quarantine, they'll need time to gear up and penetrate the wall. If they have assets inside Harran, then they could already be on their way." Jade finished. "We prepared for war." The tower's defenders took positions on every floor, armed with whatever weapons we could scavenge. Barricades were reinforced. Escape routes were established. Families and non-combatants were moved to the most secure parts of the building, and we waited. They came at midnight. Not a full frontal assault. That would have drawn too much attention. But a precision strike. Special forces, heavily armed and equipped with night vision and suppressed weapons. They came from multiple directions simultaneously, scaling the outside of the building, entering through ground floor windows, even rappelling from a helicopter that hovered just long enough to deploy its cargo. The first we knew of the attack was when the power went out. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow. Then the shooting started. The defenders fought bravely, but they were outmatched. These weren't thugs or scavengers. These were professional soldiers, moving with military precision and overwhelming firepower. I was on the 5th floor when they breached our position. 3 soldiers in full tactical gear, moving like a well-oiled machine. I barely had time to take cover before bullets tore through the wall behind me. "Contact! 5th floor, East Corridor!" I shouted into my radio, then returned fire with a rifle I'd taken from a dead soldier. The firefight was brutal and chaotic. I was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of ammunition. One of the soldiers flanked me, coming through a side room. I saw him too late. His rifle was already aimed at my chest. Then Amir was there, his machete flashing in the emergency lights. The soldier went down, and Amir pulled me to my feet. "Fall back. They're pushing us to the upper floors." We retreated, fighting every step of the way. Other defenders joined us, consolidating our forces. But we were losing. Too many casualties, too much ground given up. Brecken's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, fall back to the roof. We're evacuating via the emergency route." The emergency route was a series of zip lines and rope bridges connecting the tower to adjacent buildings, risky in broad daylight, potentially suicidal at night with soldiers shooting at you. But it was our only option. We fought our way up, floor by floor. Behind us, I could hear explosions. The soldiers were using breaching charges to bypass our barricades. They'd be on us in minutes. The roof was chaos. Survivors were evacuating across the zip lines while defenders provided covering fire. I could see Jade helping people onto the lines, Brecken coordinating the retreat, Suleiman clutching his research bag like his life depended on it. Which, I supposed, it did. "Crane!" Brecken shouted. "We need to buy them time!" I took position at the rooftop access door, rifle ready. Beside me, Amir and several other defenders did the same. When the soldiers came through, we'd make them pay for every inch. The door exploded inward. Flashbangs followed, blinding and deafening. Then came the soldiers, moving through the smoke and chaos with practiced efficiency. We opened fire. The first wave went down, but more kept coming. Too many. We were being pushed back toward the edge of the roof. I was down to my last magazine when I saw him, Director Morrison himself, directing the assault from behind his troops. He saw me too, and our eyes locked across the smoky rooftop. "Crane!" he shouted. "It doesn't have to end like this. Give us Suleiman and the research, and the rest of you can live." "Go to hell!" I shouted back. "Then you'll die for nothing. The truth will never get out. We'll bury you and everyone in this city." Maybe he was right. Maybe we were going to die here, our efforts meaningless. But at least we'd die fighting, die trying to do the right thing. Then the volatiles came. They emerged from the darkness like avenging angels, drawn by the noise and lights and chaos. Dozens of them, moving across rooftops and walls with terrifying speed. They hit Morrison's forces like a hammer, tearing through soldiers with claws and teeth. The soldiers tried to fight back, but volatiles in the dark were nearly unstoppable. The disciplined assault dissolved into screaming chaos as the creatures attacked from all sides. Morrison was shouting orders, trying to rally his troops, but it was too late. The roof had become a killing ground, and we weren't the prey anymore. "Move!" Brecken was shouting. "Everyone across the lines! Now!" We didn't need to be told twice. We ran for the zip lines while the volatiles decimated Morrison's forces. I was the last one across, the sounds of screaming and dying following me into the night. We regrouped in a safe house 3 blocks away, doing a head count. We'd lost people, too many. But most had survived. Suleiman still had his research. We were alive. But Morrison had been right about one thing. We couldn't hide forever. They'd keep coming until we were all dead or captured. Unless we could get the truth out first. Part 5. The broadcast. The safe house was cramped and tense. Survivors huddled together, tending wounds and trying to process what had happened. The tower, our home, our sanctuary, was lost. But we still had hope. Suleiman worked frantically with the tower's technical team, setting up equipment in a corner of the safe house. "We can boost the signal using these," he said, pointing to several devices scavenged from the tower. "Route it through multiple frequencies. Make it harder to jam or block." "How long will it take?" Brecken asked. "Hours. Maybe less if we're lucky." "We don't have hours. Morrison's people will be searching for us. And once they realize we survived the tower attack, they'll come with everything they have. Then we'll need to defend this position," I said. "Set up a perimeter. Prepare for another assault." Jade was studying a map of the area. "This location is bad for defense. Too many approaches, not enough high ground. We should move to—" "No time," Suleiman interrupted. "The equipment is set up here. Moving it would take too long, and we might not get another chance." He was right, but that meant we were stuck in a location that favored attackers. We'd have to make the best of it. We spent the next hour fortifying what we could, barricading doors, setting up firing positions, preparing traps and fallback points. It wasn't much, but it might buy us the time we needed. As we worked, Suleiman compiled the data he wanted to broadcast. His hands shook as he typed, whether from fear or exhaustion I couldn't tell. "This is everything," he said. "The virus research, the conspiracy, the names of everyone involved that I know. Once this gets out, there's no putting it back in the bottle." "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "Once we do this, you can never go back. The people behind this will hunt you for the rest of your life." "I know. But what choice do we have? If we stay silent, we're complicit. We let them get away with murdering hundreds of thousands of people. I won't do that. I can't." I respected that. It took courage to stand up against that kind of power, knowing it might cost you everything. "How long until you're ready to transmit?" Brecken asked. "Maybe 20 minutes. The encryption is taking longer than I—" He was interrupted by the sound of gunfire from outside. Our perimeter guards were engaging someone. "Contact! Multiple hostiles approaching from the east," the radio squawked. They'd found us already, so much for buying time. "Keep working," I told Suleiman. "We'll hold them off." I joined Jade at the east barricade. Through the windows I could see figures moving in the darkness. At least a dozen, maybe more. They were being cautious, using cover, not rushing in. Professional soldiers again. "Can't be Morrison's people," Jade said. "We left them being eaten by volatiles." "Rice, then. He's probably heard about the assault on the tower. Figured we'd be vulnerable." "Great. We've got the GRE and a warlord both trying to kill us. Just another day in Harran." The first assault came fast. Rice's men rushed the building from multiple sides, using covering fire to suppress our positions. We returned fire, but we were outnumbered and outgunned. They breached the ground floor, and we fell back to the second floor where Suleiman was working. The safe house was turning into a death trap, with enemy forces below us and nowhere left to retreat. "How much longer?" I shouted to Suleiman over the sound of gunfire. 5 minutes, maybe less." 5 minutes, an eternity in a firefight. Amir was at the stairs, holding off 3 attackers with nothing but his machete and sheer determination. Jade was at a window, picking off targets with a rifle scavenged from a dead soldier. Brecken was coordinating our defense, moving defenders to where they were needed most. And I was trying to keep Suleiman alive long enough to finish his work. An attacker made it past our defenses, bursting into the room where Suleiman was working. And I intercepted him, my crowbar meeting his rifle in a shower of sparks. We grappled, his training evident in every move. He was stronger than me, faster, better equipped. But I was more desperate. I got him into a chokehold, using his own momentum against him. He struggled, trying to break free, but I held on. After what felt like forever, he went limp. I shoved him aside and checked on Suleiman. "Still working," I gasped. "Almost there, just need to—" "Got it. We're live." He hit a button, and the equipment began transmitting. Somewhere out there, people were receiving his broadcast. Journalists, activists, anyone with a radio or internet connection. The truth was getting out. "How long do we need to transmit?" Brecken asked. "At least 10 minutes to reach enough people. I make sure it spreads too far to suppress completely. 10 more minutes of holding this position. 10 more minutes of hell." The attackers renewed their assault, throwing everything they had at us. Explosions rocked the building. Bullets tore through walls. People were screaming, fighting, dying. I lost track of time. The world narrowed to the immediate. Aim, fire, reload, repeat. Next to me, Jade was bleeding from a head wound, but still fighting. Amir had fallen back from the stairs, his leg injured. Brecken was everywhere, shouting orders, rallying defenders, refusing to give up, and through it all, Suleiman kept broadcasting. Then I heard it, the sound I'd hoped never to hear again. That chittering screech, volatiles. But this time, they weren't attacking us. They were attacking Rice's men. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see them moving, fast, deadly, tearing through enemy positions with savage efficiency. And in the lead was one I recognized, the experimental subject from the museum. It was even more mutated now, almost unrecognizable as human. But somehow it knew who its real enemies were. The tide turned. Rice's forces, caught between our defenders and the volatiles, began to break. They retreated in disorder, leaving their wounded behind. The volatiles pursued, their hunger for vengeance apparent in every movement. "We'd won. Barely, but we'd won." "Transmission complete," Suleiman announced, his voice breaking. "It's out there. The whole world knows now." I collapsed against a wall, my body finally acknowledging its injuries and exhaustion. Around me, other survivors were doing the same. We'd lost people, too many, but we'd succeeded. The truth was out. "What happens now?" Jade asked, slumping down beside me. "I don't know," I admitted. "But at least it's not a secret anymore. The minister, GRE, everyone involved, they can't hide what they did. The world knows." Brecken's radio crackled to life. It was a voice I didn't recognize, speaking in accented English. "This is Captain Chen of the UN Peacekeeping Forces. We've received a broadcast from Harran containing allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. I am authorized to inform you that the Security Council has ordered an immediate investigation. The military quarantine will be maintained, but humanitarian aid is being organized." Please respond with your position for extraction." We looked at each other, hardly daring to believe it. After months of abandonment, the outside world was finally paying attention. "This is Harris Brecken, Tower Settlement. We have survivors in need of immediate medical attention. Transmitting coordinates now." As Brecken sent our location, I felt something I hadn't felt since the helicopter crash. Hope. Real, tangible hope that we might actually survive this. But the battle wasn't over. The minister and his people were still out there. Morrison, if he'd survived, would be seeking revenge. And Rice still controlled much of Harran. The war for Harran's future had just begun. Part 6. Aftermath. The UN peacekeepers arrived at dawn, their helicopters marked with blue and white insignia. They came in force, medical teams, security personnel, journalists with cameras. The world was watching Harran now, and the conspiracy couldn't be covered up. We were evacuated to a forward operating base that had been established just outside the quarantine wall. Medical tents, supply depots, and communications equipment stretched as far as I could see. It was surreal after months in the ruins of Harran, this organized, functioning infrastructure that had been just beyond the wall all along. The doctors checked us over, treating injuries and malnutrition. I had a bullet graze on my arm, cracked ribs, and a shoulder injury that needed surgery. But I was alive. Most of us were alive. Suleiman was immediately whisked away by UN scientists who wanted to review his cure research. He went willingly, but not before clasping my hand. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me." "For fighting for the truth." "Thank you for having the courage to speak out," I replied. The next few days were a blur of debriefings, interviews, and medical procedures. Everyone wanted to know what had happened in Harran, wanted to hear about the conspiracy and the cover-up. I told my story dozens of times to different investigators, each time reliving the horror and chaos of those months in the quarantine zone. The fallout was massive. The minister, whose real identity turned out to be a high-ranking defense official named Gerard Lasker, was arrested at his home in Geneva. Morrison and several other GRE officials were taken into custody. The companies that had funded the virus research had their assets frozen pending investigation. But justice moved slowly, and I wondered if the people truly responsible would ever face consequences. People that powerful had ways of avoiding accountability. Jade visited me in the medical tent 3 days after our extraction. She looked different in clean clothes, her injuries bandaged properly, but her eyes still held that intensity I'd come to respect. "They're offering us a deal," she said without preamble. "The survivors from the tower, full pardons for any laws we might have broken during the outbreak, relocation assistance, even compensation for our suffering. That's good, right? In exchange for our silence, they want us to sign non-disclosure agreements, agree not to give interviews or write books about our experiences. They're trying to control the narrative, minimize the damage to the governments and corporations involved. Are you going to sign?" She smiled grimly. "What do you think? After everything we went through to get the truth out, I'm not going to be silenced now." Brecken feels the same way. Most of the survivors do. They won't like that. I don't care what they like. They abandoned us, left us to die. Now they want to cover up their crimes with hush money? No. The world needs to know exactly what happened in Harran. I admired her conviction. These weren't just words. She meant every syllable. "What about you?" she asked. "What are you going to do?" It was a good question. I'd been thinking about it since the extraction. My career with GRE was over. Even if they'd take me back, which they wouldn't, I couldn't work for an organization so thoroughly compromised. My old life, my old identity as a loyal operative, all of it was gone. "I'm going to testify," I said, "at the War Crimes Tribunal, at the congressional hearings, wherever they need me. And then, I don't know, maybe I'll write a book. Make sure no one forgets what happened here." "The world won't forget," Jade said. "Not with all of us speaking out. Harran will mean something. All those people who died, they won't have died for nothing." I wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. The UN investigation continued for months. Teams entered Harran, now carefully monitored and controlled, to gather evidence and assess the situation. They found mass graves, improvised laboratories, and evidence of the conspiracy at every turn. The case against Lasker and his co-conspirators grew stronger every day. Suleiman's cure research proved viable. With proper resources and laboratories, he and his team developed a treatment that could prevent infection if administered early enough and halt progression in recently infected individuals. It wasn't perfect, couldn't save the volatiles or those who'd been infected for too long, but it was hope. Distribution of the treatment in Harran began cautiously. The city was still dangerous, still full of infected and volatiles, but slowly it was being reclaimed. Neighborhoods were secured, survivors were rescued, and the process of rebuilding began. I returned to Harran 6 months after the extraction, as a civilian consultant helping with the recovery efforts. The city looked different in daylight, with UN forces maintaining security and construction crews beginning to repair damaged infrastructure. But the scars remained. Buildings marked with spray-painted warnings about infected nests, empty streets where communities had once thrived, memorials to those who hadn't survived. The tower still stood, damaged but intact. I climbed to the top floor, to Brecken's old office, and looked out over the city. From here, I could see both the destruction and the hope, the ruined sections that would never be rebuilt, and the areas where people were starting to return, starting to live again. Jade found me there. She'd returned to Harran, too, leading a runner network that now worked with UN forces to locate and rescue survivors. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, standing beside me at the window. "Being back here with support. It's with resources, knowing we don't have to fight alone anymore." "Strange but good," I agreed. "Brecken's talking about running for mayor when they reopen the city government. Says Harran needs someone who understands what the people went through. He'd be good at it. Amir's opening a school for the kids who survived, teaching them parkour and survival skills, but also reading and math and art, trying to give them a future beyond just surviving." These were good things, signs of healing and hope. But I knew the city would never fully recover from what had been done to it. The scars ran too deep. "The trial starts next month," Jade said. "Lasker, Morrison, all of them. Are you ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be." The trial was held in The Hague, broadcast worldwide. I was one of dozens of witnesses who testified about the conspiracy and the outbreak. Suleiman gave technical testimony about how the virus had been engineered. Survivors from the tower shared their stories of loss and survival. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, testimony. All of it pointing to a deliberate act of bioterrorism conducted under the guise of research. The defendants tried to claim they were following orders, that they didn't know the full scope of what was happening, that it was all a terrible accident. No one believed them. The verdicts came down on a cold day in March, almost 18 months after the outbreak began. Lasker, guilty on all counts. Morrison, guilty. The corporate executives who'd funded the research, guilty. The politicians who'd covered it up, guilty. They were sentenced to life imprisonment, their assets seized, their reputations destroyed. It wasn't enough. Nothing could truly compensate for the hundreds of thousands who died, but it was justice. Epilogue. 2 years later, I stood in the cemetery on the outskirts of Harran, where they'd built a memorial to the outbreak victims. Thousands of names carved into black stone, representing just a fraction of those who died. Many would never be identified, never be named, but they were all remembered here. Jade and Amir were with me, along with Brecken and dozens of other survivors. We came here every year on the anniversary of the outbreak to pay our respects and remember. Harran itself was healing, slowly but surely. The quarantine had been officially lifted 6 months ago, though many areas were still off-limits due to remaining infected. But people were returning, rebuilding, refusing to let the city die. The cure, Suleiman's legacy, had saved countless lives, not just in Harran but worldwide. The knowledge gained from the outbreak had led to better treatments for other diseases, better understanding of virology and epidemiology. Something good had come from the horror, though the price had been terrible. Suleiman himself had passed away 3 months ago, his body finally succumbing to the stress and damage of those months in hiding. But his work lived on, his name now associated with life-saving medicine rather than bioweapon conspiracy. I'd written my book, as I'd promised. Harran, A survivor's account had become an international bestseller, keeping the memory of the outbreak alive and the lessons learned in the public consciousness. The proceeds went to survivor support funds and reconstruction efforts. Jade was now deputy mayor, working with Brecken to rebuild Harran into something better than it had been before. Amir's school was thriving, teaching a new generation of kids that survival wasn't just about fighting, it was about community, compassion, and hope. And me? I'd found purpose in helping other survivors, in speaking out about the dangers of bioweapons research and government overreach. I traveled the world, telling Harran's story, making sure no one forgot what had happened. As the memorial ceremony ended and people began to disperse, I stayed behind for a few moments, looking at all those names, thinking about all those people who'd never gotten the chance to see Harran healed. "You okay?" Jade asked, waiting for me. "Yeah, just thinking about how different things could have been. If we hadn't fought back, if we'd given up. But we didn't. We fought, we survived, and we made sure the truth came out. That counts for something. It counts for everything." We walked together back toward the city, where reconstruction crews were working on a new medical center that would be named after Dr. Camden, Suleiman's partner who died in the outbreak's early days. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and crimson. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Harran had taught me that even in the deepest darkness, hope could survive. People could survive. Truth could survive. And sometimes, that was enough. The end.